Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you once again to this powerful session of our Executive Wellness Podcast. Today, I will be uh, speaking to you on the topic that I have titled Overcoming Guilt, Shame, and Regrets. Overcoming Guilt, Shame, and Regrets. Now, I know that every one of us at one point in time or the other in our life we have encountered what it means to feel guilty, or maybe somebody made you feel guilty of something maybe you did or you did not do. uh, we have all encountered shame, we've all encountered regret. These are emotions that I believe that there is no human living or dead that has never experienced this uh, in his or her life. Every one of us at one point in time of our life, we've encountered what it means to feel guilty. We've encountered shame. We've also encountered regret. But there is something so profound that one of the Greek philosophers said many years ago, thousands of years ago, and that is Seneca. Seneca says everything hangs on one's thinking. A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is. Now, what that means is that before you can become guilty of something, before you can become shameful of an act, and before you can begin to regret an action or a situation or a decision that you made, uh, it is often time based on your personal choice and your personal decision. It is how much you are able to convince yourself about that particular issue that will determine the amount of happiness and unhappiness that you are going to endure as a result of that event that took place in your life. So our happiness is deeply tied to the way we think. And if you come to think of it, this emotion that we are talking about, the guilt, shame, and regret, they are something that happens within the enclave of our mind, within within our mind. That is where it happens, and it is how much we've been able to convince ourselves over this event that has happened that will determine how much of guilt we are going to experience, how much of shame we are going to experience, and how much of the regret that we are going to experience. So our perception, therefore, and our self-conviction is what, in essence, shape our reality. Now, there was something uh, that happens many years ago. I think it should be 2001 or thereabout. I went to Shagamu to visit one of my friends, and I decided to stay over in their house to spend the night with them. And while I was there, I interacted with his family. We had a lot of fun together, and he gave me a book written by Stephen Covey, and the title of the book is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. So when I read that book, I instead of sleeping that night, what I did was to spend the entire night just focusing on the book, reading the book, and I was so much inspired by the content that I encountered in the book. And I think in chapter 2 of that book, Stephen Covey was making reference to the word perception or perspective. That is how we see things. You see, how we see things in life will always shape the kind of emotion that will be generated within us. Now, if you look at life generally, there are so many questions that there is in life. Some we have answers to, and there are so many that we don't have answers to yet. Now, I think I was listening to an astrophysicist sometimes ago, and he was saying that uh, from all the knowledge that they've been able to gather about the universe and the space, he said if we were to quantify the amount of what they know about what is out there in the space, he said it is less than 2% of what there is to know. And that is to tell you that there are so many unanswered questions about life than the ones that we have answers to. It is only a fool who will believe that he has answers to all the questions of life. Now, I would never pretend to have answers to all the questions of life, and don't let anybody deceive you that they do have answers to all the questions of life. And if there is going to be uh, a kind of conflict between what we know and what we don't know about life, I think the most sensible way to bridge that gap is to focus on what we know, on what we see, and how we see things. If we can pay our attention to our perception of life, that is how we see things and what we see through life, I believe it is going to help a lot in the way that we experience some of this emotion. Uh, there is an anonymous quote that I saw sometimes ago which says, "Life is a reflection of what we allow ourselves to see." So, in other words, our perception of life is what often manifests in the way we feel, the way we act, the way we do things. So it affects our guilty conscience. It affects the way we feel shame. It also affects the way we regret over things. So therefore, our perception is very, very important to how we experience these feelings. And this is the reason why this executive wellness podcast is very, very important. Every one of us, we've encountered these emotions at one point in time in our life. I've had time, I have felt guilty, uh, I've had time, I have been ashamed of certain actions that I undertook. I've had time that I've regretted over certain steps that I have taken. But the most important thing is that uh, when we understand that it is our perception that is important, that is key in how we really experience these feelings, it will help us to be able to put them under control. If you don't know that your perception is going to affect how guilty you are going to be over an event in your life, or how you are going to experience shame over certain issues in your life, or how you are going to experience regret over certain event that is taking place in your life. If you don't know that your perception is what controls it can do a lot of damage to your life. So it is how to control the damage that you will experience through this emotion. That is the reason why I have brought this podcast to you. And that is why the topic of this podcast is overcoming guilt, overcoming shame, and overcoming regret. So before we uh, continue further, I would like to kind of do definition of the concepts that are very germane in this topic. We want to look at what guilt is. Sometimes they can look like they are the same, but they are not really the same. They are very distinct from one another. So we are going to see the distinguishing factor that differentiate each of them from one another, and then we're going to see how they connect also to one another. So when we say guilt, what do we mean by guilt? Now, guilt is a feeling of responsibility or remorse for a wrongful act or behavior that violates one's moral or ethical standard. Now, this is where I want you to pay attention to. Guilt often focuses on a specific action, such as I did something bad. Now, guilt all the time wants you to hold your action, and that is why you feel guilty. When you do something and you own the action, maybe is a kind of moral failure on your part, and you are able to show that you are responsible for that action, that is when guilt comes into place, because it helps you to understand that this action that you have taken uh, is something that is morally wrong, something that is unethical in the society. So guilt oftentimes wants us to own our action, our behavior. It wants us to be responsible for what we have done. Sometimes, occasionally, we may not really have done something really bad, but people can sometimes make you feel guilty for what you have not really done. They can make you to own, to be responsible, uh, to have a feeling uh, of a to have a feeling that this action that may not necessarily be something that was done by you, but they want you to own it as though it were your decision or your action to act in such a manner. Uh, that is how people can make you feel guilty, and this is where your perception comes in, because when you have a very healthy perception of how things operate, of how things should be, then it will help you to know how to manage uh, that guilt trip that people want you to have in that regard. Then let's talk about shame. Shame is a painful emotion. There is no doubt about that. It's a painful emotion that arises from the belief that one is inherently flawed, unworthy, or defective. In fact, this is a very serious one. Now, shame does not just focus on your action. Shame focuses on your person. So you are not looking at what you have done. You are looking at yourself as the failure in the occurrence of that event. So you are not just dealing with what has happened, you are dealing with yourself in an unworthy manner, in a flawed manner, as a defective human being, which for me I think is a very sad state for any man to be. We've all been ashamed of certain actions in our life before, because in that instance, we're not just thinking about that action as something that is bad, but in that instance, we are seeing ourselves as actually the problem. So, what shame does is to diminish your self image, and you can see uh, how dangerous this can be to living a, a healthy and a life that is free of every problems of life. Then let's talk about regret. Regret manifests in sorrow or disappointment over a past action. You know, regret is more of a reflection of what has happened. You know, you only regret something when you have reflected on it and then you have come to terms with yourself that I think the way I behaved in this situation is not the way I ought to behave. So regret focuses on disappointment over a past action or decision or a missed opportunity. Maybe you missed an opportunity to be employed in a particular job, and it's uh, often with a wish that things could have been done differently. That is one thing about regret. You always believe that you could have done it the other way, or there is always a better way that you could have done uh, that thing. In as much as that may be true, but sometimes it can be very, very disempowering if you regret all the time without necessarily focusing on the lesson that that wrong step is trying to teach you at that moment. So when you take a wrong step or you take a wrong decision or you miss an opportunity, I don't want you to just reflect and continue to mourn that missed opportunity. I like you to reflect and see what that situation can teach you so that you can redirect yourself and move in the right direction. Now, on many accounts, all these emotions that I've mentioned, guilt, shame, and regret, they can overlap. But what I want you to know is that they do differ in what they focus on. And you can see from the definition that I've given that their focus is different. But in many instances, they can overlap. The central focus of guilt, for example, is on your action, what you have done. That is what it focuses on. Whereas shame does not just focus on what you have done, shame focuses on your self-worth. I am bad. I am not good enough. I cannot make it. That is what I am not up to the standard. That is what shame wants you to believe about yourself. And of course, regret, on the other hand, focuses on your outcome, the results of your action. So why do we feel guilt, shame, and regret? Why do we experience this emotion? It's very important for us to understand why we feel this emotion in the first instance. For example, guilt. Guilt, for example, helps us to focus on internal moral compass. Is what guides our moral compass from within. Guilt acts as an internal moral compass, whereby encouraging us to act within the society, within a certain set norms and through some values and norms. That is what guilt does. Sometimes when you are supposed to act in a particular way and you refuse to act in that way, guilt can set in. And in such instance, it can make you, if you are able to use it in a way that it will benefit you, you can use that guilt moment that you are feeling to redirect yourself and correct your action. Another thing that guilt does is that it's what enables us to function uh, socially. Guilt can be of help when it comes to how we function in the society, because guilt sometimes can help us to maintain a good harmony, a good harmony. If we don't feel guilty over certain actions of ours, then there is certainty that we may end up destroying ourselves without knowing. Sometimes the act of feeling guilty sometimes is a way through which our inner self redirects us to act in a way that is consistent with our values. It helps us to act in a way that is consistent with our values. Individuals who feel guilty after harming others were more likely to correct their behavior. So sometimes some of these emotions are not entirely bad in themselves, but if we manage them correctly, they can be a source of strength for us. But when we don't know how to manage them, then they can also lead to destruction. So sometimes when we feel guilty, it is because uh, uh, guilt is wanting us to redirect our actions in such a way that it helps us to increase the friendship and the values that we have among ourselves within the society. Now, let's talk about shame. Let's talk about shame. Shame, I would say, is an antidote for social rejection. The reason why we feel ashamed is because we feel that when we feel ashamed of certain actions that were taken by us, yeah, it will help us to prevent rejection from the society. That is why we feel shameful of certain actions that we take. That is why we feel ashamed of certain behavior that we display. It is an antidote for social rejection. Shame signals a perceived threat to one's social standing or self-worth, prompting self-reflection or withdrawal to avoid further social rejection. So when we feel shameful over an action, it is because we don't want such action to take place. But sometimes, if this emotion is not well managed, they can also be damaging to our self-image. And that is why we need to understand how this emotion works so that we can apply them appropriately. Another thing that shame does is that shame can enable social cohesion. You know, when people in a social group are behaving in a particular way and you are behaving in the opposite direction, when you feel ashamed of your action, then what it does is to make you align yourself with the societal norms. It helps you to align yourself with the societal norms. One of the things that shame help us to do is to help us avoid being ostracized. You don't want to be separated from the group. You don't want to be a lone ranger. That is the value of shame. But like I said, if it is not well managed, it can also lead to the destruction of our self-image. And of course, regret. Regret is all about uh, triggering our reflective thinking. Before you can regret an action, you must have reflected upon it. You must have thought over it. You must have believed that you have learned a lesson from the mistake uh, over the decisions that you have taken so that your future decision will be affected in a positive direction. What regret does is to help us to evaluate what would have been if something has happened in a particular way. What regret does is to help us look at it in a different light and ask ourselves, what would have been in this manner? And of course, the emphasis of regret is always on our future outcome. Regret focuses on refining decision-making processes. Those who reflected on poor choices, e.g., choosing a dangerous path. So, what regret does is to help us to focus on, to reflect on our poor choices, on our poor decision, and then to help us redirect our actions. Now, how do we feel this emotion? We're talking about why we feel guilt, shame, and regret. Now we want to talk about how do we feel this emotion. There is a particular way these emotions are uh, often expressed within us. We don't just feel guilt, shame, and regret stereotypically. That's not just the only way we feel it. Although there is no man alive, like I said at the beginning, or dead, who has never felt these feelings before in a convicting way. We have all felt guilty at one point or the other in our life. We have all felt ashamed at one point or the other in our life. But the most important thing is to understand how these emotions often manifest themselves in our life. Guilt, for example, guilt, for example, uh, is a kind of recognition of violation of our personal moral standard. And for you to be able to feel guilty, you must be able to have what we call self-awareness. That is your ability to compare your action and internalize your value and and the societal norms. You are able to know what you are able to give, what the society demands from you, and then being able to marry everything together. So that is what, and once there is a dysfunctionality in the alignment of these values, of your own value and the value that the society demands from you, once there is a misalignment in this, that is when uh, guilt comes in. Guilt also can also make us feel remorseful, often with a desire to fix the problem at hand. Most of the time, when we feel guilty, it is because we think uh, something is not done the right way, and then we have the mindset of wanting to do it the appropriate way. As of course, another thing is that guilt may stress responses like increased heart rate or tension as the body prepares to act. That is another thing uh, that guilt can do. It can make us to it can cause our body to act in a certain way. You feel when your heart begins to beat at a very fast rate. When you begin to feel certain tension within your body, then that is a sign that we are feeling guilty over an issue. And of course, sometimes guilt can also make us snap at our co-workers and later realize that what we have done is not really fair to them, prompting us to feel guilty about our action and then to have the desire to make amendment. Now, how do we feel shame? Shame, on the other hand, stems from a negative evaluation, often triggered by our perceived failure or exposure. Shame oftentimes is tied to how we think others perceive us or how we view ourselves against a particular standard. Shame make us feel embarrassed. It make us feel worthless, and then shame can also make us have a feeling of wanting to disappear uh, within human setting or within human group. That is what shame can do for us. But uh, if we understand how these emotions are felt, it will help us in the way we manage them. And of course, regret. Regret involves, like I said, It is a reflective thinking. It's something you have thought over and then you realize that you could have done something in a certain way instead of doing it in the particular way that you have done. Uh, Regret often make us feel sadness, disappointment, or frustration, often with a longing for a different outcome. So, however, it is important to know that excessive or unresolved guilt, shame, or regret can lead to mental health issues like anxiety or depression. And that is where I want us to be mindful about uh, the destructive side of this emotion. If these emotions are not well managed, they can lead to mental health issues like anxiety and depression. So, how do we overcome guilt, shame, and regret? Uh, to overcome guilt, there are some certain steps we can take. Number one, we need to acknowledge and take responsibility for our action. Number two, we need to accept responsibility is the first step to resolution as it aligns with guilt's purpose of prompting accountability. Number two, the second thing you need to do is to make amends. If possible, uh, take action to repair the harm, such as apologizing sincerely, offering restitution, or changing your behavior. If you have lied about something, admit it and then clarify the truth. Let people know what the true situation of that particular issue is. Then, often it helps us to make amends, and also we can also act to correct the situation by uh, alleviating the guilt by aligning our behaviors to our true values. Another way we can overcome guilt is to learn from the experience. Um, there is need for us to reflect on what led to that action and then to avoid repeating that same action in the future. Another thing is to practice self-forgiveness. Remind yourself that mistakes are an expression of our human frailty and don't and does not necessarily define our worth. So we have to use our self-compassion. We have to use self-compassionate language such that I made a mistake, but I am learning and growing. There is so many studies that shows that when we self when we show self-forgiveness, it reduces the negative impact on our mental health. Uh, Sometimes guilt can be unwarranted because people can actually make you feel guilty. So, in such a situation, uh, what do you do? When people make you feel guilty, then what you need to do is to kind of uh, look at that issue critically and then understand that you are not the cause of that action. And don't let people make you feel guilty over what you have not committed. So you need to have a balanced view of what has happened and then align yourself appropriately. So, how do we overcome shame? The first thing we need to do in overcoming shame is to separate ourselves from the behavior. Don't merge yourself with what has happened. There is you, and then there is the action that has taken place. So, the first thing you need to do to overcome shame is to separate yourself from the behavior. Then, number two, you need to practice self compassion. You need to treat yourself with kindness. You need to offer uh, friendship to yourself. You need to be the best friend of yourself. Uh, and when you do this, it will help you to manage the situation appropriately. And then sometimes you may need to share with trusted uh, fellows, people you believe in, people who believes in you, people who appreciate you for who you are, you might need uh, to show, you might need to share some of the experiences that you are going through with them. One problem with shame is that shame always thrives in secrecy. Shame always loves to isolate. It always makes you to believe that you are alone in that world. But once you understand the power of supportive friendship, then it will help you to break uh, the chain of shame in your life. Then we can also overcome shame by challenging social narratives. Sometimes shame often stems from internalized social or cultural expectation. For example, if the society wants us to behave in certain ways that are not necessarily the best way, sometimes that social narrative may want to keep us isolated in a shameful way. So, what you need to do in such a situation is to kind of uh, organize your value such that uh, shame does not have a defeating power over you. Another thing you can do to overcome shame is to build positive self identity. That is, you need to engage in activities that reinforces your strength and your values, like volunteering and pursuing uh, social activities that aligns with your value. Now, how do we overcome regrets? There are many ways through which we can overcome regrets. One of the ways is to reframe the past. That is, let's look at what has happened and then try to redefine it in another way that it will align to our future outcome. Another thing you can do to overcome regret is to focus on the present. Don't always focus on what has happened. Whatever might have happened in your life, take it as a lesson, uh, embrace the lessons that are therein, and then move forward with your life. Don't focus on what has happened, but rather focus on what is going on with you presently, so that what is happening currently in your life will have a meaningful impact on what is going to happen in your life in the future. And another thing you can do to overcome regret is to also understand that there are certain things that cannot be changed in your life. So you just have to accept that reality and move on with your life. Another thing you can do to overcome regret is to set future oriented goals. Yesterday is gone, today is what you have control over. Make the most of that which you have today, and then set a future oriented goal as you continue to move ahead with your life. Another thing you can do to overcome regret is to learn from your regrets without necessarily uh, dwelling on your failure in that instance. Learn from what has happened. Don't dwell on the failure that has occurred, but rather use it as something that will launch you into your future. So, as I come to the end of this lesson, I would like to leave you with a powerful quote from Carl Jung. Uh, Carl Jung says, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are truly meant to be, not what people assume that you should be." So, in that instance, I'd like you to know that you are your best friend. You are the one who will determine the events that will happen in your life. You are the one who is the chief driver of your life. As you begin to meditate and work on all these points that I have raised in this podcast, I want to see a new you emerge in the nearest future. Until I see you next time for our next Executive Wellness podcast, I hope you will continue to utilize the resources that have been given to you in this podcast on how to overcome guilt, shame, and regret. See you in our next podcast. Bye bye.